Good evening, black people and all allies fighting for black liberation, black prosperity, and black joy. I'm Charles Blow, and welcome back to Prime, and Happy New Year. And we're happy to have you back here on the show, and happy that you had a safe and happy holiday, hopefully. It's really good to be back with you tonight. Now, it may be a new year, but not much is new when it comes to the list of initiatives Democrats and the Biden administration promised voters they'd get done. Build Back Better is still not been passed, but now Axios is reporting that despite Manchin being a no on the vote on the package before the holiday break, he's now, surprise, surprise, returned to the negotiating table with some of the same demands. As Axios put it, Manchin is open to re-engaging on the climate and child care provisions in President Biden's Build Back Better agenda if the White House removes the enhanced child tax credit from the $1.75 trillion package or dramatically lowers the income caps for eligible families. Meaning the Senate may now need to rewrite the bill and try to get the new one voted on, which will push back the timeline of which the package could get passed if it gets passed. Also, Senate Majority Leader Schumer told colleagues today that he wants a vote on filibuster within the next 2 weeks, writing this: if Republicans do not work with us to confront the historic challenges facing our democracy, the Senate will debate and consider changes to the Senate rules on or before January 17th, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, to protect the foundations of our democracy, free and fair elections. New reports are also filing in that although Biden is planning a big speech on January 6th anniversary on Thursday, voting rights will not be part of that speech. An unnamed White House aide told the Associated Press that Biden intends to bring voting rights up in a different speech at a later time. So, with no traction so far on voting rights and more activists sounding the alarm that we're on the direct path to losing our democracy, what exactly is the Biden administration's and Democrats' priorities this year, and what exactly is their timeline? Joining me now to discuss is Dean of the College of Ethnic Studies at California State University at Los Angeles, Dr. Julianne Malveaux, and Don Calloway. So, Julianne, what do you think of this internal strategy inside the White House on voting rights versus Build Back Better as it relates to the calendar?
You know, Charles, there is an irony here. When these people say they're worried about democracy, the black folks have been worried about democracy forever. They say our democracy is broken. It's been broken for us forever. And so if Joe Biden gives this big speech and does not mention voting rights, he is disappointing the people who he said he had our back. Now, I do understand this calendar issue, and I don't know if he and Chuck Schumer have coordinated their responses, but I think that this is, for want of a better word, hogwash. And there's a lot less nice one that I could say in terms of what Biden is doing around this. A New Year's resolution is to stop cursing. It's going to last until about Thursday, but we're gonna try to make it work. Regarding filibuster, Schumer doesn't have the votes. At the end of the day, he doesn't have the votes, and so the Democrats have been doing a lot of posturing. What they need to be doing is fighting. They need to be fighting, putting their feet down. What Bill Barber has done, Reverend William Barber of the Poor People's Campaign, and mobilizing people in West Virginia to confront Manchin directly. That's the effective strategy, not this shilly-shallying and posturing. I'm pretty disappointed with Brother Biden for any number of reasons, including the fact that he's moved very slowly on student loans. He has said they can wait until May, but he has not offered the relief that he promised. And if the child tax credit goes away, that's going to disappoint millions of families and plummet millions of children back into poverty. He's really walking on a fine line, and that's why his ratings. That's why his ratings are dropping.
Right, so
his ratings are lower than Harry Truman's in his first year. Harry Truman, come on now.
Don, I want to go back to this issue of the big speech that Biden is expected to give on Thursday at the anniversary of the insurrection. He's not expected right now to include voting rights in that speech. What do you make of the fact that he's not going to do that and putting it off to some later date, at least according to this aide, but that date does not have a date attached to it?
Yeah. I mean, voting rights is all that matters right now. We're hoping that we get some type of infrastructure bill, some form of a pared back Build Back Better, and we'll see what's in that. It probably, as Dr. Malveaux points out, won't have enough to keep the progressive wing or even the leftists of the Democratic Party entirely happy. So Joe Biden's going to have to really do some heavy policy lifts. However, for right now, through the end of this calendar year, democracy reform, voting rights protections is all that really matters. And for this being the first opportunity to address the nation in the new year, particularly this being a midterm year, it's important to bring that up. Let's be clear about this. The country was attacked on January 6th, and some of those insurrectionists are sitting members of the United States House of Representatives. We got to stop drawing the distinction between those who were outside the Capitol rushing to get in and came in with the Confederate flag and all that. We have to stop distinguishing between them and the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the Gosars of the world because they're one and the same. That said, when the president has the opportunity to use his biggest and best bully platform, he's got to use it. He's got to talk about voting rights, because without voting rights, there's no real foundation to our democracy. There's nothing else to really talk about. I was encouraged by what Chuck Schumer said today. Hopefully there's some strength behind what he tweeted in terms of what he's willing to do in terms of using the power of the majority leader to shut down those who aren't for voting rights. Dr. Malveaux says he doesn't have the votes. He probably does not, but he does right now have the gavel as the majority leader, so we'll see what he's willing to pull out and what he's willing to do with it. But I'd be pretty disappointed if the president doesn't use this platform to talk about voting rights on January 6th, because fundamentally, those people wanted to subvert democracy. So voting rights were at the core of the cause of the insurrection.
So, Julianne, we don't know exactly what the president and Manchin are discussing now or have ever discussed, but there are a lot of really good reporters in D.C., and the reporting that they keep getting out of those meetings have a lot to do with Build Back Better. We never hear a mention of the fact that they were discussing voting rights. There's a smaller group of senators who are talking with Manchin about the filibuster rule, Angus King, some other Democrats, but we don't hear that the White House is directly talking to and pressuring Joe Manchin on filibuster rules, which would kind of open the way for voting rights to be passed. What do you make of this idea that the White House is just not leaning on him on the voting rights piece at all, at least at this point, at least as much as we know?
I don't think that he is leaning on him hard enough. And there are no rights if you don't have voting rights. There are no rights. You can't talk about student loans or Build Back Better. You can't talk about abortion or anything else if you don't have voting rights. And so by making this a second priority, I know Build Back Better was a centerpiece at some level of his campaign, but so was, let me not remind you again, he said to Black people, I got your back. Well, you can't have my back and leave me without the right to vote. That just makes no sense at all. And it really is insulting. And there are folks like Don who've worked so hard on this voting rights issue, folks like Latasha Brown and others, and they turned the vote out. They expected this man to stand up for them. And this is what he's not doing. Again, he's a former senator. So I think that that's part of his challenge, that he's a former senator and he respects those Senate rules. But he needs to respect democracy. He needs to respect the right to vote. He needs to ensure that all these people who've been sidelined have the opportunity to participate in our democracy. You can't talk about those insurrectionists without talking about all the people who have been basically sidelined through gerrymandering, sidelined through these silly rules that these state legislators, now there are 100 rules, I think. My colleague will correct me if I'm wrong, but there are dozens of rules to try to limit people's right to vote. And that previous president, I told you I wasn't cussing today, that previous president was trying to get secretaries of state elected. What does that mean? The people who make the voting rules. So I just don't think that the president, I don't see his passion about this. I just don't see his passion about this, and that troubles me.
Don, do you believe that the White House and also Schumer are leaning on the fact that Manchin helped to write the new version of the voting rights legislation? That they just believe that he is a sure-in to want to carve out an exception in the filibuster if it does not pass with Republican support, which it will clearly won't. Or do you think they're just leaning on that, the idea that he's definitely going to do something about it because his name is attached to this new voting rights bill?
Yeah, it's hard to speculate, but what we do know is that Joe Manchin wasn't for the People Act, and that he had his reservations with the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. So what we can possibly think is that he may possibly go along with the Freedom to Vote Act, which he had a hand in authoring along with the Senate Democratic Caucus. So we hope that he would be on board with that. Now, that's a completely different issue with whether or not he would be on board with subverting or temporarily suspending the filibuster rules in order to pass the Freedom to Vote Act. So these are two different things. We do think that he would be on board for the Freedom to Vote Act, and that is crucial because, as Dr. Malveaux points out, you've got 32 states right now, either 31 or 32, my memory fails me in my old age, either 31 or 32 states right now who have passed this hodgepodge of voter suppression bills, anything from you can't bring water to people in line, or voter ID, or even any further type of restrictions on the rules that were passed for the pandemic to expand ballot box access. So you have a hodgepodge of voting rules, and that's what the Freedom to Vote Act would bring: some uniformity, develop some federal standards. It's not a radical voting rights bill. It just develops uniform federal standards across the board, and that's what we need, because people should understand that going into 2022, going into these midterms right now, we have a complete mismatch. There is complete chaos in terms of voting rights laws, voting rights procedures around the country. And if the federal government is worth nothing else, it's got to bring some uniformity and some order to that. So we think that Joe Manchin will be on board for that, the Freedom to Vote Rights Act standard, if nothing else. But that doesn't mean that he's be willing to overturn the filibuster in order to do it. So we've got to see Chuck Schumer step up and show some muscle for real here for the first time in his time as the chairman.
Life.
Absolutely. When Don Calloway starts talking about his old age, I know it's time to go ahead and order my casket. Dr. Julianne Malveaux and Don Calloway, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it, as always. The holidays are over and COVID rates are spiking. At the same time, more recovering people are headed back to work. Dr. Corey Hebert is here to make sense of it all. You're watching Prime on BNC.